Welcome to Wonders Before Sleep. Tonight, we begin beside a quiet sea. The last light has faded from the western horizon, and the islands of the Aegean rest beneath a sky filled with stars. The water is dark, but not empty. Somewhere beyond it lies Ithaca, a small, rocky homeland that Odysseus has not seen for many years. Christopher Nolan's film has brought new attention to this ancient voyage. But long before cinema, the story traveled in another way, through voices, memory, and performance. The poem we now call the Odyssey grew within an oral tradition and reached written form in the world of early ancient Greece. It carries the traces of many tellings, and perhaps of many generations of listeners. This will not be a hurried summary of every monster, battle, and angry god. Instead, we will move slowly through the world behind the poem. We will follow the story of a man trying to return home. We will also step aboard the kinds of vessels known to early Greek sailors, consider how crews crossed the Aegean, and look more closely at the houses, harbors, customs, fears, and expectations that made the tale meaningful to its first audiences. The Odyssey does not begin where we might expect. It does not open with Odysseus leaving the ruins of Troy. It begins much later, when his homecoming has already been delayed for years. Odysseus is far from Ithaca and held on the distant island of the goddess Calypso. Back at home, his wife Penelope waits. His son Telemachus has grown toward adulthood, and unwanted guests consume the wealth of the household. The hero is absent, but the space he has left behind is full of tension. From its opening, the poem asks what happens to a home when its master does not return. It asks how long loyalty can endure, how a son becomes an adult beneath the shadow of a missing father, and how a stranger should be treated when he arrives without warning at the door. These questions belong to myth, but they also belong to ordinary human life. The sea between Troy and Ithaca becomes more than a stretch of water. It is distance made visible. It separates war from peace, wandering from belonging, and the person Odysseus has become from the household he hopes to recover. Yet we should be careful when we speak of the real world behind the Odyssey. The poem is not a photograph of a single historical year. Its heroes are placed in a legendary age associated with the Bronze Age and the memory of Mycenaean Greece. But the poem took shape through a long oral tradition, and much of its language, society, and material world also reflects the centuries in which its singers and audiences lived. Old memories and later experience sit beside one another. A bronze weapon may belong to one layer of the past. A social custom may feel closer to another. A ship can carry echoes of real seafaring while also sailing toward islands that no map can securely locate. That mixture is not a flaw. It is one reason the poem has remained so powerful. The Odyssey feels ancient even within antiquity. Its world is distant, but never entirely unreachable. We recognize the desire to come home. We understand the unease of arriving among strangers. We know that a meal, a bath, a safe place to sleep, and a friendly welcome can transform a dangerous journey. In the poem, hospitality is not merely politeness. The Greek idea often described by the word xenia binds hosts and guests through duties of protection, food, gifts, and mutual respect. Good hosts help travelers move safely through an uncertain world. Bad hosts reveal something broken, not only in themselves, but in the society around them. This is why so many encounters in the Odyssey begin at a doorway, beside a fire, or around a table. Before a traveler tells his full story, he may first be washed, fed, clothed, and offered a place to rest. Only later do the questions begin. Who are you? Where have you come from? And what sea has carried you here? The sea itself was both road and risk. For communities around the Aegean, water connected islands, coastlines, ports, and trading partners. Ships could carry people, pottery, timber, metal, oil, wine, stories, and news. Sailors learned coastlines and winds through experience. They watched landmarks when land remained visible, and the sky when darkness or distance removed familiar shapes from view. The ships described in Homer's world were not floating palaces. They depended on wood, rope, cloth, human strength, and knowledge shared among a crew. Sail and oar worked together. Vessels could be drawn up on shore. Space was limited, weather mattered, and a sheltered landing place could be more valuable than comfort. At night, the sea changed character. The coastline faded, the temperature fell, the sounds of water, wind, and rigging became clearer. A light on shore might promise safety, while an unseen reef, or sudden squall, could turn the same darkness into danger. It is easy to understand why sailors filled the edges of the known world with wonders. The Cyclops, Circe, the Sirens, and the strange lands of the poem do not need to be reduced to simple historical explanations. They belong to poetry. But they also grow from the emotions of travel, hunger, temptation, isolation, curiosity, fear, and the possibility that beyond the next headland, the rules of ordinary life may no longer apply. Tonight, we will let those worlds remain mysterious. We will not try to force every island onto a modern map or turn every creature into a weather report. Instead, we will travel between story and history, allowing each to illuminate the other. So, settle into whatever position feels most comfortable. Allow your shoulders to soften. There is nowhere you need to travel tonight. The ship is ready. The sea is calm. Above the mast, the first familiar stars are beginning to appear. And somewhere beyond the dark water, Ithaca is waiting. The story begins on Ithaca, but Odysseus is nowhere to be seen, and his absence lies over the island like a long shadow. 20 years have passed since he sailed for Troy. 10 were spent at war, and nearly 10 more have gone by since the Greek ships began their journeys home. Some warriors returned quickly, while others were delayed by storms, conflict, or misfortune. A few never reached their own shores again. Odysseus has become the most uncertain of them all. No one on Ithaca knows whether he is alive, because no messenger has arrived with certain news, and no familiar ship has entered the harbor. His house still stands, but it no longer feels secure. Penelope waits within it as both wife and queen, although her position becomes more fragile with every passing year. Without proof of her husband's death, she cannot truly mourn him, yet without proof that he lives, she cannot know how long she is expected to wait. Around her, powerful young men have gathered. They are called the suitors because each hopes to marry Penelope, but marriage to her would offer more than companionship. It would place one of them close to the center of Odysseus's household, wealth, and authority. The suitors do not wait politely outside. They enter the house each day, consume the animals raised on the estate, drink the family's wine, and expect the servants to attend to them. A guest was normally protected by the customs of hospitality, but these men have turned hospitality into occupation. They entered as visitors, and slowly began to behave like masters. The damage is not dramatic, yet it is constant. Every meal consumes part of the household's wealth, while every day without resistance makes their presence seem more permanent. The house of Odysseus is not destroyed in a single attack. It is being worn down from within. His son, Telemachus, watches all of this. He was still an infant when his father left for Troy, so he has no clear memory of the man whose place he may one day inherit. Now he stands at the edge of adulthood, old enough to understand what the suitors are doing, but not powerful enough to remove them. His father's reputation surrounds him, although it cannot act on his behalf. In the opening book of the Odyssey, Telemachus sits among the suitors and imagines his father returning. He pictures Odysseus appearing at the doorway, and the strangers being driven from the hall. For a moment, hope takes the shape of a familiar man coming home. But the doorway remains empty. Far away from Ithaca, Odysseus is alive, though he is living on the distant island of Ogygia with the goddess Calypso. The island is beautiful. Calypso's home is surrounded by trees, birds, clear water, and fragrant plants, and it seems sheltered from ordinary hardship. Yet Odysseus is not content there. When the poem finally shows him, he is sitting beside the sea and looking across the water in tears. Calypso offers him comfort and even the promise of a life beyond ordinary human age, but he continues to long for Ithaca. This longing is central to the poem. The Greek word nostos means a return home. It can describe the journey itself, but also the restoration that a true homecoming might bring. Odysseus does not only want to reach a place on a map. He wants to return to his name, his family, his household, and his place among the living. Home is not presented as perfect. Ithaca is rocky, its household is troubled, and its future is uncertain. Penelope is surrounded by pressure, while Telemachus does not yet know how to defend what remains. Still, Odysseus chooses that imperfect home over a timeless life on a distant island. At the beginning of the story, he cannot make that choice effective by himself, because the gods must first decide that his wandering has lasted long enough. Poseidon remains angry with him, but Poseidon is away, and in his absence Athena speaks for Odysseus before the other gods. Athena has watched over him for many years. She values his intelligence, patience, and ability to survive through careful thought. Before she can bring him home, however, she turns her attention to Ithaca. She arrives there in disguise, appearing to Telemachus as a traveler named Mentes. The young man does not know that a goddess has crossed his threshold, yet he welcomes her according to the customs of a good host. He notices the stranger waiting at the door, takes her spear, leads her inside, and offers a seat, food, and drink before asking who she is. This order matters. A stranger is first made safe, and only later do the questions begin. The scene creates a quiet contrast. Telemachus respects the duties of a host, even while the suitors abuse the same tradition around him. During their conversation, Athena gives him something he has been missing. She gives him a direction. She tells him to call an assembly and speak openly about the suitors. Then he should sail in search of news. He is to visit older men who returned from Troy, because Nestor at Pylos may know something, and Menelaus at Sparta may have heard where Odysseus was last seen. The journey may not bring his father home, but it will take Telemachus beyond the rooms where he has felt powerless. It will allow him to speak as the son of Odysseus, rather than remain only the child who was left behind. The Odyssey therefore begins with two journeys. One belongs to a man who is trapped far from home. The other belongs to a son who is preparing to leave it. Both journeys move toward the same absent center. Odysseus is missing from Ithaca, yet everything on the island is shaped by him. His wife waits, his son searches, and his household weakens. Across the dark sea, the man they cannot see continues to look toward home. Before Odysseus became a wanderer, he had already spent 10 years far from home. Those years belonged to the war at Troy. In the world of the poem, The conflict began after Helen, the wife of Menelaus, was taken to Troy by the Trojan prince Paris. Greek leaders gathered their ships, crossed the Aegean, and laid siege to the city. The war became the great shared memory behind both the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad does not tell the whole story of Troy. It focuses on a short period near the end of the fighting, when anger divides the Greek camp and Achilles withdraws from battle. The Odyssey begins after the war is over, but Troy remains present in almost every part of the story. It survives in memories, old wounds, lost companions, and the long delay between departure and return. Odysseus is remembered as one of the most intelligent Greek leaders. Later tradition credits him with the plan of the wooden horse, although the full story is not told in the Iliad itself. The horse offered the Greeks a way to enter a city they had failed to conquer through force alone. To later audiences, the episode became a perfect example of Odysseus's greatest strength. He could survive through patience, disguise, persuasion, and careful planning. Yet victory at Troy did not bring peace to the men who had fought there. When the city fell, the Greek alliance began to break apart. Some leaders quarreled. Others angered the gods through violence or disrespect. The fleet that had crossed the sea together did not return as one united force. Each commander faced his own journey home. Some reached familiar shores quickly, but others were scattered by storms or driven far from their intended routes. The stories of these returns were known as the Nostoi, the homecoming tales. Most of those poems have not survived, but traces of them remain in later literature and in the Odyssey itself. They remind us that the end of a war is not the same as the end of danger. A soldier may leave the battlefield, yet still be far from safety. For the Greeks returning from Troy, the sea became a second test. The ships were carrying men who were tired, wounded, grieving, and eager to reach home. They also carried the memory of 10 years spent in a world shaped by siege and violence. Behind them stood a ruined city. Ahead of them lay open water, uncertain weather, and households that had changed during their absence. Some men would discover that the people waiting at home had changed as much as they had. Others would never arrive at all. The journey from Troy was therefore more than a movement across a map. It was a passage from war back toward ordinary life. For Odysseus, that passage would become longer than the war itself. It is tempting to ask whether the Trojan War truly happened exactly as the poems describe it. The answer is more complicated than a simple yes or no. Troy was a real place. Its ruins stand at Hisarlik, near the western coast of modern Turkey, where archaeologists have uncovered the remains of many settlements built one above another. Some of those settlements were destroyed by fire or conflict, and one or more may preserve memories connected to the legends of war. But archaeology cannot confirm the full story of Helen, Paris, Achilles, or the wooden horse. The poems are not eyewitness reports. They are works of epic poetry, shaped by performance, memory, and imagination over many generations. Their Troy belongs partly to history and partly to myth. That uncertainty matters for our journey. We can speak of real trade routes, real ships, and real communities around the late Bronze Age Aegean. We can also recognize that the poem combines those memories with customs and details from later centuries. The world behind the Odyssey is layered. It may preserve the distant memory of powerful Mycenaean kingdoms, with their fortified centers, long-distance trade, and warrior elites. At the same time, the poem often reflects the social world known to the audiences who heard it in early Greece. This is why a bronze weapon, a later custom, and an imagined island can all appear in the same story without seeming out of place. For the singer and the audience, the heroic age was not a museum display. It was a living past. It could be reshaped each time the poem was performed, while still remaining connected to familiar names and places. Troy stood at the center of that remembered world. Its destruction marked the end of one great struggle, but it also began many separate stories of return. Agamemnon sailed toward Mycenae. Menelaus wandered through the eastern Mediterranean before reaching Sparta. Nestor returned to Pylos. Odysseus began the longest journey of them all. At first, he did not know how long it would take. He left Troy with ships, companions, and the expectation that Ithaca lay somewhere ahead. The distance was not impossible. Under ordinary conditions, a voyage from the coast of Troy toward the Ionian Islands could be completed far more quickly than 10 years. But the Odyssey is not a story of ordinary conditions. Odysseus moves through a sea where practical danger and divine anger exist side by side. Storms can rise because weather is unpredictable, and also because a god has chosen to intervene. A strange shore may belong to a real coastline, or to a place beyond the limits of ordinary geography. The poem allows both possibilities to remain open. This gives the voyage its unusual character. It feels grounded in the real experience of sailing, yet free to move beyond the world that sailors could safely explain. For the men aboard Odysseus's ships, however, each danger would have felt immediate. They still needed water. They still needed food. They still needed a place to land, repair their vessels, and rest. Myth could shape the meaning of the journey, but survival depended on ordinary choices. A crew had to read the sea, trust its leader, and hope that the next shore would offer shelter rather than danger. So, as the smoke of Troy faded behind them, the ships turned toward home. The men believed the war was over. They did not yet understand that the sea had its own story to tell. Once the ships had left Troy behind, the sea became their road. To modern eyes, the Aegean can look like a broken landscape of water and islands, but to ancient sailors it was also a network of routes. The coast was rarely a distant boundary. It was something to follow, recognize, and return to. Headlands, mountain shapes, islands, and sheltered bays helped sailors understand where they were. A familiar coastline could offer confidence, while an unfamiliar one demanded patience and caution. Travel did not always mean crossing a vast open sea. Much of the time, a vessel could move from one visible landmark to another. A crew might leave a harbor in the morning, follow the shape of the coast, and look for a safe place to stop before darkness or bad weather. This did not make the journey easy. The wind could change. A calm surface could become rough. A narrow channel between islands might strengthen the current or force a ship closer to rocks. Even a short distance could become difficult if the weather turned against the crew. Sailors therefore learned to read more than maps. They watched the color and movement of the water. They noticed clouds, birds, changes in the wind, and the way distant land appeared through haze. Knowledge came through repeated journeys. A sailor who had crossed the same stretch of sea many times would remember where the water became shallow, where a harbor opened behind a headland, and where sudden winds were common. This kind of knowledge was practical, local, and often shared by word of mouth. The sea connected communities that might seem isolated when viewed from the land. An island could receive pottery, metal, oil, wine, timber, tools, stories, and news from places beyond the horizon. A harbor was therefore more than a place to anchor. It was a meeting point between households, traders, sailors, and strangers. The Aegean was filled with movement long before the age of Odysseus was imagined. Ships carried goods and people between islands, the Greek mainland, the coast of Anatolia, and more distant parts of the eastern Mediterranean. The routes changed over time, but the need for skill, shelter, and cooperation remained. A journey might depend on the season. Some periods offered steadier weather, while others brought stronger winds, colder nights, and a greater risk of storms. Sailors could not control those conditions. They could only decide when to leave, where to stop, and how much danger they were willing to accept. For Odysseus and his companions, the sea was never simply empty space between Troy and Ithaca. It was a chain of choices. Every headland concealed another stretch of water. Every island offered the possibility of food, repair, rest, or danger. And every departure required faith that the next shore would appear where experience said it should. The sea routes of the ancient Mediterranean were shaped by necessity as much as by ambition. A crew needed fresh water, food, and places where a damaged vessel could be pulled ashore. They needed wood for repairs, rope that had not weakened, and enough strength to row when the wind failed. This made long journeys a sequence of smaller decisions. A ship did not simply travel from one city to another. It moved from bay to bay, harbor to harbor, and island to island. Each stop created a new encounter. Some were peaceful. A crew might trade, refill water jars, or share news with people who had seen other ships arrive. Other encounters were uncertain. Strangers could be welcomed, watched, questioned, or driven away. The Odyssey turns this uncertainty into one of its central patterns. Again and again, Odysseus reaches an unfamiliar shore without knowing what kind of people live there. Will they offer food and shelter? Will they respect the customs of hospitality? Or will they treat a stranger as an enemy? These questions belong to the poem, but they also reflect the real tension of travel in a world without modern ports, schedules, or rescue services. A safe landing depended on geography. A safe welcome depended on people. The sea itself could also change the meaning of distance. A place that seemed close on a clear day might disappear behind rain or darkness. An island visible from one angle could blend into the horizon from another. When land vanished, even experienced sailors had to rely on memory, direction, weather, and the sky. The famous phrase often translated as the wine-dark sea reminds us that Homer's ocean is not described in the language of modern charts. It is a place of color, movement, depth, and mood. The surface can shine beneath the sun, turn black under clouds, or become almost silver in moonlight. For a tired crew, those changes were not only beautiful. They affected visibility, confidence, and fear. The sea could feel generous when the wind was steady and the coast remained in sight. It could feel hostile when waves rose and every familiar landmark disappeared. This emotional landscape is part of what gives the Odyssey its power. The journey is practical, but never merely practical. Every stretch of water becomes a test of endurance, judgment, and trust. The crew must trust the ship beneath them. They must trust the leader who chooses the route. And they must trust that the world still contains another safe shore. As Odysseus sails away from Troy, the route home seems possible. Ithaca lies far to the west, but not beyond imagination. The men know that ships have crossed these waters before. They know that islands and coastlines stand between them and home. What they do not know is how often the journey will be interrupted, or how many times a familiar sea will lead them toward something strange. For now, the oars rise and fall. The sail fills. The coastline begins to move behind them. Ahead, the Aegean opens into a road made of water. The ships that carried the Greeks away from Troy were built for movement, not comfort. They were wooden vessels, shaped by hand from materials that had to survive salt water, wind, strain, and repeated landings. Their exact form varied across time, and Homer's poetry does not preserve a technical drawing. Even so, the poems, ancient images, and later archaeology allow us to imagine the general demands placed upon them. A ship needed a strong hull, but it also needed to remain light enough to move under oars. It needed space for men, food, water, weapons, rope, and whatever goods the crew carried home. It also needed to be handled by people who understood how its parts worked together. The mast supported a square sail, which could take advantage of a favorable wind. When the wind weakened, changed direction, or became unreliable, the crew could turn to the oars. Sailing and rowing were not separate worlds. They were two parts of the same journey. A crew used the wind when it could, and human strength when it had to. This made the ship dependent on both weather and discipline. The rowers needed to move together. A badly timed stroke could waste energy or disrupt the rhythm of the vessel. A well-trained crew, by contrast, could turn effort into steady motion. The work was repetitive. Hands tightened around wooden oars. Shoulders and backs followed the same pattern again and again. The hull answered with each stroke, moving forward through the water. From a distance, the movement might have looked calm. Inside the ship, it demanded concentration. The crew also needed to manage the sail. Ropes had to be handled quickly, especially when the wind changed. Cloth that offered speed in good weather could become dangerous if a sudden gust caught it at the wrong moment. Everything depended on judgment. The ship itself could not decide whether to continue, turn, land, or wait. Those choices belonged to the people aboard it. In Homer's world, a vessel is often described through action rather than design. It is launched. It is drawn onto land. Its mast is raised. Its sail is spread. Its oars strike the sea. These repeated actions make the ship feel almost alive, although its movement always depends on the crew. For Odysseus, the ship is more than transportation. It is the space between danger and survival. While it remains sound, the men still have a way forward. If it is damaged, delayed, or lost, the journey changes completely. The wooden hull beneath them therefore carries more than bodies. It carries the possibility of return. Life aboard such a vessel would have been crowded and exposed. There were no private cabins waiting below deck for every man. Space was limited, and much of the journey took place close to the open air, the sea, and the weather. Food and water had to be carried carefully. Fresh water was essential, but heavy. A crew could not simply take an unlimited supply, especially when every jar, bundle, and tool competed for space. This is one reason safe landings mattered so much. A shore offered the chance to refill water, cook, repair equipment, and rest on firm ground. In many cases, ships could be pulled onto the beach rather than left floating overnight. This protected the hull from rough water and made it easier for the crew to inspect damage. It also turned the shoreline into a temporary camp. The men might eat there, sleep there, and prepare for the next stage of the voyage. The boundary between ship and land was therefore flexible. A vessel carried the crew across the water, but the shore allowed the journey to continue. Repairs were part of that rhythm. Wood could split. Rope could fray. A sail could tear. Small problems had to be noticed before they became dangerous. The crew needed practical knowledge, but also patience. A rushed departure with damaged equipment could turn a manageable crossing into a disaster. The ship also carried social order. Everyone aboard had a role, even if the poem does not describe every task in detail. Someone watched the weather. Someone handled the steering oar. Others rowed, managed ropes, guarded supplies, or helped bring the vessel ashore. Leadership mattered because the crew had to act as one group. Odysseus was expected to choose routes, judge danger, and decide when to continue. His men were expected to follow. This relationship was not always easy. The poem repeatedly shows moments when trust begins to weaken. The crew may question a decision, ignore an order, or act from hunger, fear, or exhaustion. A ship at sea gave little space for private disagreement. Tension remained close to the surface because everyone depended on the same hull. At the same time, the vessel created a shared world. The men saw the same horizon. They felt the same wind. They listened to the same creaking wood and the same water moving along the sides of the ship. For a while, their lives followed the rhythm of the sea. The vessel rose and fell beneath them. The sail tightened, then softened. The oars entered the water and returned. Behind them, the last familiar shore became smaller. Ahead of them, another island slowly took shape. From a distance, it might promise shelter. It might offer food, fresh water, and a quiet night. Or it might draw them into the next part of a journey they still believed would be short. By the time evening came, the character of the voyage began to change. During the day, the crew could watch the coastline, judge the weather, and follow the movement of the sun. As the light faded, familiar shapes softened and the distance between sea and sky became harder to read. A safe shore was always valuable at night. When conditions allowed, a crew might draw the ship onto land, secure the equipment, and rest near the water. The beach offered firmer ground, easier access to supplies, and a chance to inspect the vessel before the next departure. But not every night ended on a sheltered beach. Sometimes the journey continued after sunset, and the men remained aboard while darkness settled around them. The ship would not have offered the comfort of a later passenger vessel. There were no private rooms, no soft beds, and little protection from cold air or spray. Space had to be shared with ropes, jars, tools, weapons, food, and the ordinary equipment of travel. A man trying to rest would have needed to adapt to the movement beneath him. The hull rose and fell with the water. Wood shifted under strain. Ropes tightened, loosened, and touched the mast with small repeated sounds. Even in calm weather, the ship was never completely still. The sea moved along the sides of the vessel, sometimes with a gentle rhythm and sometimes with a heavier knock. The crew would have known those sounds well. A new noise could signal a loose rope, a change in the wind, or a problem that needed attention. Familiar sounds, by contrast, could become part of the background of the journey. Someone still had to remain alert. A ship at night could not simply be left to find its own way. The steering needed attention. The wind could change. Land might appear more quickly than expected, especially near islands, headlands, or shallow water. The crew may not have followed a single formal watch system in every period or on every voyage, but some men would still need to stay awake while others rested. That responsibility made the night uneven. One man might close his eyes beneath a cloak while another watched the darkness ahead. A third might wake because the sail changed its sound or because the vessel turned beneath him. Rest came in fragments rather than in one quiet, uninterrupted sleep. Still, there could be moments of calm. When the wind was steady and the water gentle, the ship might move with a slow rhythm that encouraged the body to relax. The oars could be drawn in. The sail could carry more of the work. Above the mast, the night sky opened wider than it had during the day. Without the lights of a modern coast, the stars would have seemed bright, numerous, and close to the moving sea. The night sky was beautiful, but it was also useful. Sailors could observe familiar stars and constellations, especially when land was no longer clearly visible. The poem itself describes Odysseus watching the heavens during his voyage from Calypso's island. He keeps the Great Bear to one side while following the direction he has been given. This does not mean that every sailor used a precise system like modern celestial navigation. Their knowledge was more practical and experience-based. A familiar pattern in the sky could confirm direction. The rising or setting of a star could help mark time. Clouds hiding the heavens could remove one of the few reliable guides available after dark. The same sky also carried stories. Constellations were not only points of light. They were connected to gods, heroes, animals, and remembered events. A sailor looking upward could therefore see both direction and meaning. Below that sky, ordinary needs still continued. Water had to be protected from spilling or contamination. Food had to last between landings. Cloaks and other coverings offered some defense against wind, dampness, and cold. The temperature on the water could fall sharply after sunset, especially when the body was tired from rowing or exposure. Salt could dry on the skin. Clothing might remain damp. Hands that had gripped rope and oars throughout the day could become stiff as the night grew colder. The men aboard Odysseus's ships were warriors, but they were also travelers with the same physical limits as anyone else. They became hungry. They became exhausted. They needed warmth, sleep, and a sense that the journey was still moving toward home. The ship gave them no certainty, yet it did give them a shared routine. Someone checked the ropes. Someone watched the sail. Someone listened for changes in the water. Someone looked toward the horizon for the first sign of land. In this way, the night passed through small acts of attention. The men did not need to understand every mystery of the sea. They only needed to keep the vessel moving safely until morning. As the hours went by, darkness slowly changed. The stars shifted. The eastern sky began to lose some of its depth. A faint line appeared where the sea met the horizon. Then the first grey light touched the sail, the mast, and the faces of the men who had remained awake. Morning did not guarantee safety, but it returned shape to the world. The coastline became visible again. An island that had been only a darker patch in the night took on color and distance. The crew could judge the wind more clearly, examine the ship, and decide where the next landing might be made. For a brief time, the sea seemed less mysterious. The vessel continued forward, carrying tired men into another day of the journey. Behind them, the night closed without leaving a mark on the water. Ahead, the next shore waited beneath the morning light. When morning returned the coastline to view, the crew could begin to judge its position again. Ancient sailors did not have magnetic compasses, satellite signals, or printed charts that showed every harbor and hazard. They navigated through a combination of memory, observation, and experience. The shape of a headland could become a guide. A mountain rising behind the coast might confirm that the ship was approaching the right island. The color of the water, the direction of the wind, and the movement of the waves could all offer useful information. No single sign was enough on its own. A crew had to compare what it saw with what it expected to find. This made local knowledge especially valuable. A sailor who had traveled the same route many times might recognize a harbor before anyone else. He might know that a certain bay was safe in one wind but exposed in another. he might remember where the current pulled toward rocks, or where a narrow passage opened beyond a line of cliffs. Such knowledge could not always be written down. It lived in stories, instructions, repeated journeys, and the habits of experienced crews. The sun also helped sailors understand direction and time. Its position changed through the day in a pattern everyone knew, even if the exact path varied with the season. At sunrise, the light revealed the eastern horizon. At midday, shadows shortened. By evening, the sun's descent gave warning that darkness was approaching. These observations were simple, but they mattered. A crew deciding whether to continue or seek shelter needed to know how much light remained. The wind was equally important. A favorable wind could carry the ship forward with far less effort than rowing. An unfavorable wind could slow progress, force a change of course, or make departure unwise. Sailors learned the character of seasonal winds, although local conditions could still surprise them. Air moving around mountains and islands might strengthen suddenly. A calm bay could lie only a short distance from rough water. The same landscape that helped a crew find its way could also shape the weather against it. This is one reason patience was part of navigation. Reaching home was not only a matter of choosing the correct direction. It also required waiting for the right moment to move. When land disappeared, navigation became more uncertain. The crew could still watch the sun by day and familiar stars by night, but clouds could remove those guides without warning. The wind might remain useful, yet it could also change. A route that seemed clear in calm weather could become difficult once visibility faded. The poem captures this uncertainty again and again. Odysseus receives directions, but he rarely controls the whole journey. He can prepare a ship, choose a course, and watch the sky. He cannot command the sea to remain calm. This difference between skill and control lies at the heart of the voyage. A good sailor could reduce danger, but never remove it entirely. Even an experienced crew might be driven away from its intended route. A storm could scatter ships that had traveled together. Strong winds could carry a vessel past a familiar coast and into waters the crew did not recognize. Once that happened, every decision became more difficult. Should they continue in the hope of finding land? Should they turn back? Should they lower the sail and wait? Should they trust that the wind would change again? The Odyssey gives these choices a divine dimension. A storm may rise because Poseidon is angry. A favorable wind may be sent by another god. For the audience of the poem, practical seamanship and divine influence did not need to exclude each other. The sea could obey natural patterns and still remain part of a world shaped by the gods. This gave every journey a moral as well as physical uncertainty. A crew might ask not only whether the weather was changing, but whether some greater force had turned against them. Still, survival depended on ordinary action. Ropes had to be secured. The sail had to be adjusted. Water had to be kept out of the vessel. The men had to row, listen, and respond quickly. Fear could not replace work. In this way, navigation became an act of attention. The crew watched the world for small signs. A bird flying toward land might suggest that shore was near. A change in the waves could hint at shallower water. A distant cloud might gather above an island that remained below the horizon. None of these signs offered certainty. Together, however, they could help sailors form a judgment. The journey moved forward through many such judgments. Some were correct. Others led the ship toward delay, danger, or discovery. For Odysseus, the path home would never be a straight line. It would bend with the wind, disappear beneath clouds, and open again only when the sea allowed it. The men could choose how to sail. They could not choose what waited beyond the horizon. As Odysseus moves farther from Troy, the familiar world begins to loosen around him. The coastlines become harder to place, and each new island seems to belong less clearly to ordinary geography. This change does not happen all at once. At first, the men still behave like travelers who expect to find food, water, and people much like themselves. Yet each landing teaches them that the next shore may follow different rules. One of the earliest encounters is with the Lotus Eaters. The land appears peaceful, and its people do not attack the strangers who arrive there. Instead, they offer them the lotus. Those who taste it lose the desire to continue the journey. They do not become violent or ill. They simply stop longing for home. For Odysseus, this is a quiet but serious danger. A storm can damage a ship. An enemy can wound a man. The lotus threatens something less visible. It weakens the will to return. Odysseus forces the affected men back to the vessels, ties them beneath the benches, and orders the crew to leave at once. The scene is brief, but its meaning reaches through the whole poem. Homecoming depends on memory. A traveler must continue to believe that the place he left behind is worth the effort of reaching it again. The lotus offers relief from effort, grief, and responsibility. It also offers forgetfulness. Odysseus refuses that bargain. Soon after, the ships reach the land of the Cyclopes. Here, the landscape is rich, but the society is strange. The Cyclopes do not gather in assemblies. They do not share laws in the way the Greeks expect. Each household lives apart and follows the will of its own master. To Odysseus and his companions, this absence of shared order feels deeply unfamiliar. The danger becomes personal when they enter the cave of Polyphemus. Inside, they find food, animals, storage vessels, and the signs of a working household. The place is not empty, but its owner is away. Some of the men urge Odysseus to take what they need and leave. He refuses. He wants to meet the owner of the cave and receive a guest gift. This decision reveals both confidence and curiosity. It also reveals how strongly Odysseus expects the customs of hospitality to protect him. When Polyphemus returns, that expectation collapses. The Cyclops closes the cave with a stone that the men cannot move. Then he asks who they are, not as a generous host, but as someone deciding what to do with intruders. The scene turns the familiar pattern of arrival into something threatening. The strangers have entered a household. Yet here, the host does not recognize the duties that should make them safe. Polyphemus is not merely a dangerous creature. He is also the opposite of the good host. He offers no meal to his guests, no protection, and no promise of safe departure. Instead, he traps the men and treats them as if the laws of ordinary society do not apply. Odysseus survives through the quality for which he is best known. He uses thought before force. He gives the Cyclops wine, waits until Polyphemus is helpless, and tells him that his name is nobody. Later, when the blinded Cyclops calls for help, the other Cyclopes hear him say that nobody is harming him. They leave, believing there is no enemy to fight. The escape beneath the sheep is another act of careful planning. Odysseus and his surviving men cling beneath the animals as Polyphemus feels across their backs. The plan works because it uses the Cyclops' own habits against him. Yet the danger is not over. Once the ship has pulled away from shore, Odysseus cannot resist revealing his true name. He wants Polyphemus to know who defeated him. That moment of pride changes the rest of the voyage. Polyphemus calls upon his father, Poseidon, and asks the god to delay Odysseus's return. From then on, the sea itself becomes more hostile. The episode is often remembered for its violence, but it also turns on more subtle tensions. Curiosity brings Odysseus into the cave. Intelligence allows him to escape. Pride creates a new enemy. The same qualities that save him can also prolong his suffering. Later, Odysseus reaches the island of Circe. Her home appears more welcoming than the cave of Polyphemus, but appearances remain uncertain. Circe receives some of the men with food and drink. Then she transforms them into pigs. The danger here is not open attack. It is the loss of human identity. The men remain aware of what has happened, yet they no longer have their own bodies or voices. Odysseus goes to rescue them. On the way, the god Hermes gives him a protective plant and tells him how to resist Circe's power. When her spell fails, Odysseus forces her to restore his companions. The island then changes character. What began as a place of fear becomes a place of rest. Circe feeds the men, offers advice, and allows them to recover. They remain for a full year. Once again, the journey is threatened by comfort rather than violence. The men are safe. They have food. They are no longer fighting the sea. But Ithaca is still far away. Eventually, the crew reminds Odysseus that rest has become delay. He asks Circe for the way home. Her answer leads him toward darker knowledge, because before he can continue, he must travel to the edge of the world and speak with the dead. After that journey, the sea leads Odysseus toward another kind of danger. Circe warns him about the sirens. Their threat lies in the voice. They sing to passing sailors and promise knowledge of everything that has happened in the world. The offer is difficult to resist because it speaks directly to curiosity. A sailor who listens wants to move closer. The ship then breaks upon the shore, and the journey ends. Odysseus wants to hear the song, but he also wants to survive it. He orders his men to block their ears with wax. Then he tells them to bind him tightly to the mast. As the vessel approaches, the sirens call to him. He struggles against the ropes and commands the crew to release him. The men cannot hear his words, and they obey the earlier order instead. They tighten the bonds and continue rowing. The plan allows Odysseus to come near the danger without surrendering to it. But it also shows how uncertain self-control can be. He prepares wisely because he knows that, in the moment itself, wisdom may not be enough. Beyond the sirens wait Scylla and Charybdis. One is a many-headed creature hidden in the cliffs. The other is a force in the sea that draws water downward and throws it back again. Odysseus cannot avoid both. He must choose the danger that is likely to destroy fewer men. There is no clever solution that saves everyone. This makes the passage different from the escape from Polyphemus. Intelligence still matters, but it cannot remove loss. Sometimes leadership means choosing between two harmful paths. The voyage through these islands moves between fear and wonder. Each place reflects a different threat. The lotus offers forgetfulness. Polyphemus rejects hospitality. Circe takes away human form. The sirens offer knowledge that cannot be safely possessed. Scylla and Charybdis make escape impossible without sacrifice. These encounters are not ordinary history. They belong to myth, and the poem never asks us to reduce them to a single real location or natural event. Their power comes from the emotions they give shape to. A traveler may fear hunger, violence, temptation, isolation, or the loss of direction. He may also fear becoming someone who no longer wishes to return. The islands make those fears visible. They give them voices, bodies, caves, songs, and shorelines. For the men aboard the ships, however, the journey remains practical. They must still row. They must still secure the sail. They must still listen for orders and watch the water ahead. Myth surrounds them, but survival continues through ordinary action. The ship passes the final danger and enters quieter water. Behind it, the voices of the sirens fade. The cliffs become smaller. The surface of the sea begins to settle. For a little while, there is only the movement of the vessel and the long distance still remaining before home. After so many dangerous shores, the idea of a good welcome becomes more important than ever. In the Odyssey, hospitality is not a small social courtesy. It is part of the order that makes travel possible. A stranger arriving at a house does not know whether he will be protected, questioned, ignored, or attacked. The host must decide how to receive him. The Greek idea often described by the word xenia joins guest and host through a set of expectations. A traveler may be offered food, water, a place to sit, and time to recover before explaining who he is. The host may also provide a bath, clean clothing, a bed, or a gift for the next stage of the journey. These actions are practical, but they also carry moral meaning. They show that the stranger has been recognized as a person rather than treated as a threat. The order of events matters. In many scenes, questions come only after the guest has been made safe. First, there is food. Then there is rest. Only later does the host ask for a name, a homeland, and the story of the voyage. This pattern appears when Athena visits Telemachus in disguise. It also appears when Odysseus reaches the land of the Phaeacians. After years of wandering, Odysseus arrives there alone. He is exhausted, exposed, and uncertain of the people who live nearby. The Princess Nausicaa finds him near the shore. The meeting could easily become frightening for both of them. Odysseus is a stranger. Nausicaa is young and far from the protection of the palace. Yet the scene unfolds carefully. Odysseus speaks with restraint. Nausicaa responds with courage and compassion. She gives him clothing, tells him how to reach the city, and explains how he should approach the royal household. The welcome is not immediate or simple. Odysseus still has to enter an unfamiliar community and ask for help. But the possibility of safety has opened. Inside the palace, the customs of hospitality continue. He is given food and a place among the gathered people before his full identity is known. His story comes later. This allows the audience to see something important. Odysseus is received first as a vulnerable traveler, not as a famous hero. The quality of the welcome does not depend entirely on his name. It depends on the character of the hosts. The Phaeacians become one of the clearest examples of generous hospitality in the poem. They listen to Odysseus. They offer gifts. Most importantly, they provide the ship that finally carries him toward Ithaca. Their welcome restores what the journey has taken from him. Food restores strength. Clothing restores dignity. Listening restores identity. The ship restores movement. This is the opposite of what happens in the cave of Polyphemus. There, a stranger enters a household and finds no protection. The host refuses the duties of hospitality and turns the guests into victims. The suitors on Ithaca offer another kind of violation. They are guests who refuse to leave. They consume the household's wealth, disrespect its owners, and treat generosity as something they can seize without limit. The poem therefore shows hospitality failing in more than one direction. A host can fail the guest. A guest can also fail the host. Xenia depends on balance. A traveler should not be abandoned, but neither should he take control of the home that receives him. This balance mattered in a world where travel often depended on personal relationships. There were no hotels waiting at every harbor. A journey might rely on the protection of strangers, family connections, old alliances, or remembered obligations between households. A gift could preserve a relationship across years. A guest welcomed in one generation might later receive help from the host's descendants. Hospitality created a social bridge between places separated by distance. It also reduced uncertainty. When a stranger entered the doorway, neither side knew everything about the other. Ritual offered a safe beginning. Food could be shared before trust was complete. Conversation could begin after the first danger had passed. The Odyssey uses this pattern repeatedly because every new arrival reveals the moral character of a place. A generous household creates order. A violent or greedy household reveals disorder. The treatment of a stranger becomes a test. For Odysseus, this test continues even after he reaches Ithaca. He returns in disguise and enters his own home as an unknown beggar. The people inside reveal themselves through the way they treat him. Some offer kindness. Others offer insults. The hidden king is able to see the condition of his household before anyone knows that he has returned. This final use of disguise brings the theme of hospitality back to its beginning. Odysseus has spent years arriving as a stranger in other people's lands. Now he must arrive as a stranger in his own. The doorway he has imagined for so long is finally near. Yet before he can cross it as himself, he must learn who still remembers the duties that once held the household together. Ithaca is not described as the richest or easiest of Greek islands. It is rocky, uneven, and closely tied to the sea. For Odysseus, however, its value does not come from comfort. It is the place where his identity, family, and household belong together. The Greek word oikos can mean more than a house. It includes the family, property, servants, land, animals, and relationships that allow a household to continue across generations. When Odysseus leaves for Troy, he leaves this whole structure behind. Penelope remains at its center. She must protect the household without knowing whether her husband is alive, dead, or still trying to return. Her position requires patience, intelligence, and control. The suitors pressure her to choose a new husband, but any choice would change the future of the household. To delay them, Penelope creates a plan. She says that she must finish weaving a burial cloth for Odysseus's father, Let's, before she can marry again. During the day, she works at the loom. At night, she secretly unpicks what she has woven. For 3 years, the task remains unfinished. The plan allows her to gain time, but it also shows how limited her options have become. She cannot remove the suitors by force. She must resist through delay, secrecy, and careful words. Her intelligence mirrors the intelligence of Odysseus. Both survive by controlling what others know. Both use disguise, timing, and patience. Yet Penelope's struggle takes place inside the home rather than across the sea. Each day, she must watch the household's wealth being consumed. Animals are slaughtered. Wine is poured. Servants are divided in their loyalties. The suitors behave as though the future already belongs to them. Telemachus stands beside this crisis, but he has not yet become the kind of leader the household needs. His journey to Pylos and Sparta begins to change him. He learns to speak before older men. He listens to stories about his father. He sees households where order has been restored after war. When he returns to Ithaca, he is no longer only the uncertain young man from the opening of the poem. He is beginning to act as the son of Odysseus. The household has not yet been saved, but it now contains two people who are preparing for the same return. Penelope waits through endurance. Telemachus prepares through action. And somewhere beyond their knowledge, Odysseus is drawing closer to the shore. When Odysseus finally reaches Ithaca, he does not recognize it at once. Mist hides the familiar landscape, and the island appears strange. This moment is important. After years of longing, home does not immediately reveal itself. Odysseus has returned, yet he still has to understand where he is and what has happened in his absence. Athena removes the mist and shows him the harbor, the trees, and the shape of the land. Then she helps him prepare. Odysseus cannot simply walk into his house and announce his name. The suitors are numerous. Some servants have remained loyal, while others have joined the disorder. He needs to learn whom he can trust. Athena changes his appearance and gives him the form of an old beggar. His clothing becomes worn. His skin appears aged. The famous king returns to his own island without the signs of power that once identified him. This disguise allows him to move through Ithaca unnoticed. He first goes to the hut of Eumaeus, the swineherd. Eumaeus does not recognize his master, but he welcomes the stranger with food, shelter, and respect. His behavior shows that loyalty can survive even when certainty has disappeared. Odysseus listens carefully. He hears how the household has changed. He learns who still speaks of him with affection and who has accepted the rule of the suitors. When Telemachus returns, father and son are finally brought together. At first, Telemachus cannot believe the stranger before him is Odysseus. The transformation seems impossible. Only after Athena restores Odysseus's appearance does recognition begin. The reunion is emotional, but it is also practical. There is little time for rest. They must make a plan. Together, they decide how to enter the palace, remove the weapons from the hall, and face the men who have taken control of the household. Before that can happen, Odysseus enters his own home still disguised. The return he imagined for so many years takes place quietly. He crosses the threshold as a stranger. The people inside reveal themselves through the way they treat him. Some offer food. Some ignore him. Some insult him because they believe he has no power. Odysseus observes everything. He sees which servants remain faithful. He hears the voices of the suitors. He watches Penelope from a distance. The house is familiar, but the relationships within it have changed. Homecoming is therefore not complete when the traveler reaches the island. It is complete only when the household is restored. Odysseus has crossed the sea. Now he must recover the place that gave the journey its meaning. The long voyage narrows to a doorway, a hall, and a few people who still remember who he was. Outside, Ithaca remains quiet. Inside, the final test is beginning. The world of the Odyssey feels ancient, but it does not belong neatly to one single year. The poem was shaped through a long tradition of spoken performance. Before it was fixed in the form we know today, stories of Odysseus were told, remembered, and retold by generations of singers. A performer did not need to invent every line from the beginning. Epic poetry used familiar phrases, repeated scenes, and patterns that helped the singer guide a long story before an audience. A ship might be described through language heard in other voyages. A feast might follow a recognizable order. A hero could be introduced through words that carried the memory of earlier performances. These repeated elements gave the poem stability, but they also allowed it to remain flexible. A singer could shape the pace, emphasis, and detail of a performance while still preserving the larger story. This helps explain why the Odyssey contains more than one historical layer. Its heroes belong to a legendary past associated with the Trojan War and the memory of Mycenaean Greece. That world included fortified centers, powerful rulers, long-distance trade, and objects that belonged to the Late Bronze Age. But the poem also reflects customs and social concerns that were familiar to audiences in later centuries. The household, the assembly, the treatment of strangers, and the authority of local leaders do not always fit one precise historical moment. Old memory and later experience exist beside each other. The poem carries both. This does not make it useless as a source for the past. It simply means that it must be read with care. A description of a ship may preserve genuine knowledge of seafaring. A weapon may reflect an older tradition. A social custom may belong more closely to the world of the singers and listeners who kept the poem alive. The Odyssey is therefore not a direct window into one lost age. It is more like a room filled with objects gathered across time. Some are ancient memories. Some come from later experience. Others belong entirely to poetry. Together, they create a world that feels coherent even when its parts have different histories. For the audience, that world did not need to be separated into archaeological periods. It was the age of heroes. It stood beyond ordinary time, but remained close enough to explain the present. Families could trace honor through it. Communities could recognize familiar places within it. Sailors could hear their own fears in its storms. Travelers could recognize the uncertainty of entering a stranger's home. The heroic past became meaningful because it was never completely removed from ordinary life. The name Homer stands at the center of this tradition, although the person behind that name remains uncertain. Ancient audiences imagined Homer as a great poet. Later generations created stories about his birthplace, his travels, and even his appearance. Yet we cannot reconstruct his life with confidence. The Iliad and the Odyssey may have reached their surviving forms through processes more complex than the work of one person writing alone. For the story we have followed tonight, this uncertainty does not reduce the poem's power. In some ways, it deepens it. The Odyssey has survived because many people carried it forward. Singers performed it. Listeners remembered it. Scribes copied it. Scholars compared different versions. Readers translated it into new languages. Artists, playwrights, filmmakers, and storytellers returned to the voyage again and again. Each age has found something different within it. Some have focused on adventure. Others have seen a story about war, trauma, identity, temptation, loyalty, or the difficulty of returning home. Christopher Nolan's film is one more modern return to this ancient material. It does not replace the poem, just as earlier paintings, plays, and films did not replace it. It becomes another interpretation in a tradition that has never stopped moving. The story remains open because its central questions remain familiar. What does a long absence do to a person? Can someone return to the life he left behind? What makes a home more than a place? How should strangers be treated? What happens when intelligence becomes pride? And how much of the person who returns is still the person who departed? The poem offers no simple answer to every question. Odysseus is brave, but not always wise. He is loyal to home, yet often delayed by his own choices. He survives through intelligence, but that same intelligence can become deception. Penelope is patient, but her patience is active rather than passive. Telemachus grows by leaving home before he can help restore it. The gods guide events, but human beings must still act. These tensions allow the characters to remain alive across time. They are not perfect symbols. They make decisions, hide intentions, feel fear, and carry consequences. The world around them may be layered, but the emotional journey remains clear. A family has been separated. A household has weakened. A traveler has crossed strange seas. And after years of uncertainty, the distance between absence and return has finally become very small. The poem has carried us through caves, palaces, storms, islands, and dark water. Now its movement begins to slow. The heroic world remains behind us, but Ithaca is close. The final distance is no longer measured in open sea. It lies within the household itself. Odysseus has reached the island, crossed the familiar land, and entered his own home in disguise. The long journey has narrowed to recognition. Penelope cannot accept his identity too quickly. Too much time has passed, and too many stories could be false. She needs proof that belongs only to them. That proof is found in the secret of their bed. Odysseus once built it around the living trunk of an olive tree. It could not be moved without changing the room itself. When Penelope suggests that the bed should be carried elsewhere, Odysseus reacts at once. He explains how it was made. In that moment, she knows that the stranger before her is truly her husband. The sign of recognition is not a weapon, a ship, or a victory at war. It is something built inside the home. The rooted bed joins the living tree to the household around it. It has remained in place while Odysseus wandered. It carries the memory of a shared life that existed before Troy. Homecoming is finally complete because he remembers not only the island, but the private world he created within it. The poem does not end with every difficulty erased. The years of absence cannot be returned. Companions have been lost. The household has suffered. Odysseus and Penelope must begin again as people change by time. Yet the center has been restored. The traveler has a name. The household has recognized its master. The family has been brought back into the same place. Beyond the walls, Ithaca remains rocky and quiet. The sea still surrounds it. The same water that carried Odysseus away now lies beneath the night sky. Perhaps the harbor is calm. Perhaps a small vessel moves gently near the shore. Ropes rest against the mast. The sail has been lowered. There is no need to row farther tonight. The long voyage has ended. For thousands of years, listeners have followed Odysseus across the sea. They have heard the call of distant islands, the warning of storms, and the promise of home. Tonight, we have traveled more slowly. We have watched the coastline fade and return. We have listened to the ship, the wind, and the water. We have entered strange households and crossed uncertain doors. And now the journey can grow quiet. The stars remain above the Aegean. The sea rises and falls beneath them. Far behind us, Troy has faded into memory. Ahead, a light rests near the shore of Ithaca. There is nowhere else we need to travel. The ship is safe. The water is calm. And home is waiting beneath the stars.